The day we closed the deal that pushed our company over the $75 million mark, I thought my father would finally see me for who I was. Not just his daughter, but his partner, his successor, the one who had fought tooth and nail to build this empire with him. But instead, he looked me in the eyes and said, "You've done well, Olivia. But remember, this was always meant for your brother." My blood ran cold. I didn't even know what hit me first. The betrayal, the humiliation, or the overwhelming realization that everything I had worked for wasn't mine. I was standing in the very office I helped design, the same one where I had spent countless nights refining investor pitches, mapping logistics, negotiating contracts. And yet, in that moment, I felt like I was 12 years old again, standing in the shadows while my brother got the praise for something I had done. "This is my story," I whispered to myself, gripping the back of the leather chair as my father walked away, already on the phone with my brother. "And now I'm going to tell you everything. The meetings, the sacrifices, the lies, and how I made sure the empire they tried to take from me burned down right in front of them, without me ever laying a finger. Because when they underestimate a woman, they forget one thing. We never forget. If you were in my place, would you walk away, or would you take it all back another way? Comment below before we go any further, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the twist in this story. I used to believe that hard work spoke for itself, that if you showed up early, stayed late, and delivered beyond expectations, you'd eventually be recognized, respected, rewarded. That was the story I told myself every time I walked through the glass doors of Carter & Co. The name was mine too, Olivia Carter. But somehow, it never felt like it belonged to me. From the outside, everything looked picture perfect. I was the face of innovation, strategy, and relentless growth. Articles called me the visionary behind Carter & Co.'s meteoric rise. My father, Richard Carter, was hailed as a genius who had built an empire from nothing, and Daniel, my younger brother, was the silent partner, the wild one, the one chasing failed startups and spontaneous adventures across the country while I held the company together. People used to say we were the perfect family. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear the comments that never felt quite right. It started as small things, like when we'd land a huge client and my father would say, "This is the kind of deal Daniel needs to be a part of. Get him in on the calls." Or when we launched a new product line and he insisted, "Let's put Daniel's name on the press release too. He needs exposure." I would smile, nod, pretend I understood, because I thought it meant he was finally bringing Daniel in, that he wanted him to learn from me. I had no idea it was the opposite, that I was just filling in until the real heir was ready. The real shift came the year we hit $50 million in revenue. I remember sitting in my office after hours, staring at the spreadsheet that proved what I already knew. I had helped triple our valuation in just under 3 years. I sent my dad the final numbers. I even stayed late to prep the board presentation. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. The next day, in front of the entire board and our investors, he looked around the room and said, "The future of Carter & Co.'s is strong. I see Daniel stepping into a leadership role very soon. He's got the vision for where we're headed." I blinked. My heart didn't sink. It stopped. Daniel? Vision? He hadn't even been at the last 4 strategic planning meetings. He didn't know half of our key partners by name. I remember looking around that conference table, scanning faces, hoping someone else would speak up, that someone would correct him. No one did. And I realized, maybe they all knew. Maybe I was the only one who thought this company would ever be mine. My doubts became impossible to ignore at our annual leadership retreat in Lake Tahoe. We were in the lodge after dinner, drinks flowing, the fire crackling in the corner. Someone asked my dad casually, "So Richard, when are you retiring? Who's next in line?" Without missing a beat, without even glancing at me, he said, "Daniel's been preparing for this his whole life." The room laughed. My father laughed. Even Daniel, who had flown in just for the retreat, gave a sheepish smile. I stayed silent. I kept that same smile on my face while my insides were screaming. Preparing? How? I was the one in the trenches. I was the one who sacrificed weekends, relationships, even my health for this company. But none of that mattered. Because somewhere, long before I realized it, the decision had been made, and I was never part of it. That night, back in my room, I stared at the ceiling for hours. I kept repeating that sentence in my mind. Daniel's been preparing for this his whole life. It wasn't just a casual comment. It was a confession. And in that moment, I knew the truth. I wasn't building my future. I was building his. It happened on a Wednesday, one of those gray, unremarkable mornings that feel like filler between two more important days. I had just wrapped up a video call with our European distributor when Lauren, my assistant, appeared at the doorway with my father's laptop in her hands. He left it in the conference room again, she said. Asked if you could bring it to him before his lunch with Daniel. I took it without thinking. He did this kind of thing all the time, dropping devices, documents, problems, always assuming someone would pick up the pieces. Usually that someone was me. Back in my office, I set the laptop on my desk and went to grab a protein bar from my drawer. That's when the notification popped up. A soft ping, a calendar alert. Legacy Transition Plan, internal only. I froze. I hadn't seen that title before. The laptop was open, unlocked. It would have taken just one click. I shouldn't have done it, but I did. The file opened in PowerPoint. At first, it looked like a standard corporate deck. White background, blue text, our branding across the footer. But the first slide stopped me cold. Carter and Comer, Leadership Transfer Proposal. Second slide. Target implementation date, Q2, next fiscal year. Third slide. Incoming CEO, Daniel Carter. I blinked. Surely it was a draft. An idea. Something hypothetical. But as I kept clicking, the truth began to assemble itself like jagged pieces of glass forming a broken mirror. Detailed timelines, departmental restructures, quotes prepared for press releases, bullet points like Daniel to assume executive leadership, Olivia to support transition in strategic advisory role, exit strategy to allow Olivia time to explore independent ventures. It was a script, a performance they'd written in advance. I kept reading. There were even suggestions for how to frame it in interviews, phrases like passing the torch to a new generation and natural evolution of the company's leadership. They had planned it all. And I wasn't just being replaced. I was being erased. They wanted to make it look like I was choosing to step away, that I was taking time to pursue new challenges. They were even discussing who would announce it first, my father or the board. Somewhere around slide 13, my hands began to shake. I paused, took a breath, closed the file, and copied it quietly to my own drive. I closed the laptop, locked my screen, walked it down the hall to my father's office and handed it to him like nothing had happened. He smiled and thanked me before turning back to his phone. I saw Daniel sitting on the couch near the window, casually scrolling, laughing at something. Neither of them looked at me twice. That night, I sat in the dark at my apartment, staring at my laptop, rereading the file until the words started to blur together. The weight of what I'd just uncovered was almost unbearable. They had been planning this for months, maybe longer, and somehow, everyone but me had known. I thought back to all the times my father had asked me to loop Daniel into meetings, the way board members nodded politely when I spoke, but leaned in when he made a joke. The articles calling me the face of the brand, but never the future of it. And worst of all, I remembered what Daniel had said at our last team dinner. It had been a casual, wine-fueled moment, just the two of us near the bar. He clinked his glass against mine and said, "Hey, whatever happens in the future, you built something amazing, Liv. Seriously." I had laughed at the time. I thought it was just him being sentimental. Now, it sounded like a farewell. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing my father's voice echo in my head. Daniel brings the energy and vision for where we're headed. I had brought structure, strategy, stability. That wasn't enough. That was never going to be enough. The next morning, I walked into the office and smiled at everyone like nothing had changed. But something had. Something fundamental inside me had cracked open. I saw it all clearly now. They never intended to give me the company. They had simply used me to build it. For days, I went through the motions. Meetings, reports, calls, smiles. But I wasn't really there. Not anymore. It was like watching my own life from the outside, like I was trapped behind a glass wall while someone else lived it for me. People passed by my office and complimented the new sustainability initiative I'd launched. My team kept sending me updates on the West Coast expansion I'd fought tooth and nail for. My name was still everywhere, but inside, I was hollow. I kept thinking, maybe I missed something. Maybe I had misunderstood. So I opened the transition file again, and again. Every slide, every bullet point was unmistakably clear. They had built a future where I no longer existed. My father hadn't even planned to tell me. He was going to let me find out like everyone else, through a carefully worded email from the board, or maybe a news article announcing the next generation of Carter & Co. They weren't just pushing me aside. They were preparing to rewrite history. I started replaying everything that had led me here. Every early morning when the office was still dark and cold and I was already working. Every night I stayed behind while the cleaning crew vacuumed around me. Every time I had to smile through a client dinner, even when my feet were swollen from standing in heels for 12 hours. I thought about the vacations I canceled, the birthdays I missed, the relationship I ruined with Mark because he said I never put him first. He wasn't wrong. I didn't, because I thought this company would be worth it. I thought it would love me back. When I joined Carter & Cumder, we were a modest regional supplier of eco-packaging. My father had the vision, sure, but it was me who modernized our operations. I brought in automation. I opened our first European account. I was the one who landed the Green Earth Partnership, the one that changed everything. And every time we reached a new milestone, I believed I was earning something. Not money, not titles, but legacy, a place in the story, in the company, in his eyes. I remember one night, 3 years ago, when we finally hit $25 million in annual revenue. My father stood beside me, glass of champagne in hand, and told the team, "This is the result of hard work, and no one's worked harder than Olivia." I held on to that moment like a lifeline. Now I realized he hadn't meant it. Or maybe he had, but only as long as I was useful. The part that hurt the most wasn't that he'd chosen Daniel. It was that I had never been chosen to begin with. I was never the plan. I was the placeholder. And Daniel? He didn't even want it. Not really. Not the way I did. He liked the idea of power, of prestige. But he didn't care about the product, the people, or the purpose behind what we built. And still, my father had decided he was more deserving. Because he was a man? Because his name sounded better in a headline? Because he didn't challenge him the way I did? That week, I avoided both of them. I answered emails. I signed off on budgets. I smiled during calls. But every night, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying 20 years of loyalty in my mind, trying to understand how I could have been so blind. And then came the guilt, the kind that crept in slowly, like fog under a door. Maybe I had been too controlling. Maybe I should have smiled more, agreed more, been easier to manage. Maybe if I'd played the part better, he wouldn't have replaced me. But no matter how many ways I twisted it in my mind, I kept coming back to one truth. I had sacrificed everything for a seat at a table where I was never meant to stay. And for the first time in a long time, the grief started to turn into something else. Not fire, not yet, but embers. Quiet, glowing, patient. Something was building inside me. Something that didn't want to scream or cry or beg to be seen. It wanted to watch, to wait, to learn. Because when people show you what they think you're worth, you have two choices: accept it or make them regret it. I didn't speak a word of it to anyone. Not Lauren, not my closest friend inside the company, not even my therapist. Instead, I did exactly what they expected me to do. I showed up. I smiled in meetings, nodded in board calls, congratulated Daniel when he announced he'd be taking a more active role moving forward. He played the part so well, too. Humble, wide-eyed, constantly asking me questions like, "What would you do in this situation, Liv?" As if we were partners. As if I didn't already know he was rehearsing lines for my role. I watched him pretend to care, and I played my own role even better. Because the one thing they had never expected from me was patience. While they were busy celebrating, I was building something else. Quietly, in the background, I started by making copies. Of everything. Emails, contracts, budget proposals, memos Daniel had signed off on without reading, presentations I had written entirely, but which now bore his name in the final version. I collected them like pieces on a chessboard. Then I made subtle adjustments in our organizational structure. Nothing major, just enough to redirect certain approvals back to me. I restructured 3 of our key teams so that I was now the final review before anything went out. I also started planting seeds in other departments. A casual lunch with the marketing lead. Funny how they think Daniel's ready for this. You'd be surprised how little he reads the data reports. A quiet chat with HR. Just keep an eye on the numbers. I have a feeling next quarter's turnover rate is going to spike. I never said anything that could be traced. I wasn't reckless. I was precise. And slowly, I began to notice something shifting. Daniel started showing cracks, missing follow-ups, repeating points I had made in earlier meetings like they were his own. When investors asked him questions, he deferred to me more often than not. It was becoming clear to everyone that the crown was a little too heavy for him, but I didn't stop there. I knew I needed something bigger. So I requested access to our quarterly PR audit, under the guise of streamlining public perception for the leadership transition. What I was really doing was reviewing every instance where Daniel had taken credit for my work. I pulled articles, interview transcripts, podcast quotes, and then I wrote a report. A real, formal report, objective, data-driven, professional in tone. I titled it, Leadership Misalignment, Risk Factors in Carter & Cora's Executive Transition. It was 37 pages long. I didn't send it anywhere. Not yet. I saved it. I printed one hard copy and placed it in a sealed folder in my office drawer. Because when the time came, I wouldn't just defend myself. I would let the truth speak louder than any accusation ever could. Still, a part of me wondered, was I becoming like them? Cold? Strategic to the point of cruelty? But every time I started to doubt myself, I'd return to that moment. That room, that presentation that laid out my erasure like a business plan. This wasn't revenge for the sake of ego. It was correction. It was reclaiming the credit for the company I helped build with my own hands, while they were busy making decisions behind closed doors. I began to feel something I hadn't felt in weeks. Clarity, not anger, not sadness, focus. Because I wasn't going to take this to court. I wasn't going to leak anything to the press or burn the place down. I was going to make it impossible for them to ignore who I really was. I didn't want their approval anymore. I wanted the power to choose what happened next. And I was almost there. What would you do in Olivia's place? Would you go public now? Or wait for the perfect moment to strike? Tell me in the comments. And if this story is hitting deep, don't forget to subscribe. Because the best part of the plan is still coming. Everything looked normal. That's what made it so satisfying. I kept arriving early, leaving late. I attended every leadership meeting, sent Daniel friendly reminders about his deadlines, and even praised him during a quarterly all-hands presentation. I said, I'm proud to see my brother stepping into a bigger role this year. People clapped. He beamed. Meanwhile, the game continued. Beneath the surface, behind closed doors, and between the lines of every conversation. I started tracking patterns. Daniel had no rhythm, no instincts for leadership. He made impulsive decisions, retracted them 2 days later, and constantly asked others to explain things he should have known already. A few managers began to confide in me again, softly, carefully. I don't want to overstep, Olivia, but is Daniel okay? He seems kind of lost. Have you noticed his numbers are off? He's overpromising on delivery timelines. I never confirmed or denied anything. I just listened. I smiled, nodded, offered to help where I could. What they didn't realize was that I had become the eye of the storm, still, calm, centered, while everything around me began to unravel. I gave Daniel room to fail. I stopped correcting him in meetings. I let him take the lead in front of investors and kept my comments brief. I wanted people to see it for themselves. No manipulation, no sabotage, just the raw difference between someone who knew the company and someone who only inherited it. The more I pulled back, the more visible the gap became. In one meeting, Daniel completely misread a contract clause and promised terms we couldn't legally meet. I had to clarify gently, spinning it as a slight misunderstanding so we didn't lose the deal. My father brushed it off. He's still getting the hang of it. No, I wanted to say. He's drowning. But I didn't, because my silence spoke louder now. I also noticed something else. My father had started acting different, more cautious. He asked me more often, "What's your take on this?" He forwarded me emails asking, "Can you help Daniel with this response?" He never said it out loud, but I knew. He saw it too. He just didn't know what to do about it. And I wasn't about to save him. One Thursday afternoon, I walked into the boardroom before a monthly leadership sync. Daniel was already there, hunched over his laptop, clearly panicking about the numbers. He looked up, his expression tight. "Liv, can you take the lead on this one?" I gave him a small smile. "Of course." And I did. I presented the metrics. I answered questions. I closed with an outline of next quarter's strategy that earned 2 nods and 1 actual round of applause. Daniel stayed quiet. That evening, my father called me to his office. He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. His desk was cluttered with reports he clearly hadn't read. He leaned back in his chair and said, "I think we need to slow things down with the transition." I kept my expression perfectly still. "Maybe give it another year," he continued. "Daniel's still adjusting." I nodded. "Whatever you think is best." He looked relieved, like I had forgiven him without him needing to ask for it. But I hadn't. Not even close. Because while they were hesitating, I was finalizing. That week, I met quietly with 2 external consultants, experts in leadership restructuring and brand narrative. I presented them with a redacted version of our internal structure and asked them to evaluate company health without telling them who I was. They both gave me the same conclusion. The current leadership trajectory was unsustainable. The company needed stability and vision, not ego and improvisation. I thanked them and paid them generously. Then I opened the folder in my drawer, the one with the 37-page report. It was almost time, but I wanted to give them one last chance, one opportunity to do the right thing, because what comes next, I wanted it to be their choice, even if it was the wrong one. I told myself I would give them one last chance, one clean, quiet opportunity to do the right thing. I didn't expect an apology, not after everything, but maybe a conversation, a moment of honesty, an acknowledgement that I had, in fact, earned the seat I had occupied for years. But what I got instead was silence. And then, betrayal. Not loud, not dramatic, just a silent clinical cut delivered via email on a Monday morning at 8:12 a.m. The subject line read, "Strategic Realignment Announcement Internal Draft." It was from my father. No message, just an attachment. I clicked it open, thinking maybe it was another vague restructuring idea or more corporate fluff about Daniel's transition timeline. But it wasn't that. It was a press release. A real final draft. The headline made my heart stop. Carter & Co. names Daniel Carter interim CEO amid global expansion. I stared at the words, trying to process them one at a time. Interim CEO. Not potential, not in discussion, just done. The release was written like he had already been in charge for months, full of buzzwords about fresh leadership and new perspectives. It painted Daniel like a visionary, a bold, intuitive leader for the future. And me? I was mentioned in the 3rd paragraph. Olivia Carter, who has served as a valuable strategic executive, will transition into a newly created global advisory role to support Carter & Co.'s long-term international goals. Global advisory role. The same language they always used when pushing someone out politely. They had given me a corner title and a vague mission, just far enough from relevance to let me fade away without making noise. I read it again, and again. The words didn't change. What changed was the feeling in my chest. A sharp, cold quietness settled there. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't misunderstanding. They had made a decision behind closed doors. Again, they had sent the draft to PR. The send date was already scheduled. No one had spoken to me, not even Daniel. I forwarded it to Lauren and asked if she'd seen it. Her reply came almost instantly. "Just got it. Thought it was a mistake." It wasn't. That afternoon, Daniel came into my office like nothing had happened. He asked if I had time to review a product roadmap he barely understood. He talked about setting the tone and taking bold steps. He didn't mention the press release. Neither did my father. As if pretending it hadn't happened would make it easier to digest. But I had stopped pretending. I waited until they left for the day. Then I pulled out the folder in my desk drawer, the one I had been quietly building for months. The report, the documentation, emails, financial summaries, contracts that bore my name, but had gone public under Daniel's. The discrepancy was stark, black and white, unarguable. I added one more page, a timeline. At the very end, the betrayal, documented. I didn't feel rage, not anymore. I felt clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. That evening, I sent the report, 37 pages total, to each board member individually. I tailored the email to each one. Short, respectful, direct. I didn't make accusations. I simply showed them the facts. The next morning, I had 3 missed calls before 9 a.m., 2 voicemails, 1 urgent calendar request marked, private call with Olivia. By noon, I had 5 more. The report worked better than I expected. Because now they saw what I saw. A company built on an illusion, a transition made in arrogance, a risk not worth taking. And the truth? They didn't care that I was the daughter. They cared that I was the one keeping the company stable. The calls came in waves, concerned tones, careful wording. What's your view on the leadership climate internally? Would you be open to a separate conversation off the record? Are you willing to consider a revised structure? They were scrambling. But Daniel? He had no idea. He was still preparing for his public debut as interim CEO, still posting vague motivational quotes on LinkedIn and rehearsing his speech with the PR team. He didn't know the report existed, didn't know the board was calling me, didn't know his empire was already crumbling before it even began. I watched it happen quietly. I answered every call, took every meeting, let them come to their own conclusions. I didn't have to push. I didn't even have to ask for anything. The truth was enough. For the first time, they saw me, not as a daughter, not as a backup, but as the one person who had kept this company standing. And they realized they'd almost lost me. Almost. I didn't need to destroy anyone. I just needed them to watch everything they built without me collapse under the weight of their own arrogance. The board acted fast. Within a week of receiving my report, they scheduled an emergency closed-door session to reassess recent leadership decisions. The language was neutral, polished, corporate, but the tension in the building was undeniable. Everyone knew something was happening. Daniel didn't. Not yet. He strutted through the halls like a man crowned, shaking hands, rehearsing sound bites for interviews that would never happen. He had no idea the floor was already cracking beneath his feet. I was invited to the boardroom that Friday morning. It was the same room where I had first presented the 5-year strategy that turned us into a $75 million powerhouse. The same table where my father once told a room full of men that Olivia's the one who gets things done. Now they all looked at me with a different kind of respect. The meeting lasted 2 hours. I spoke calmly. I didn't beg. I didn't accuse. I simply answered questions, outlined facts, clarified timelines. I told the truth with the same poise they'd always admired, except this time, they were listening. When I left the room, my father was waiting in the hallway. He didn't say anything, just stared at me, unsure whether to speak as my boss or my parent. I didn't give him the chance. I walked right past him. By Monday, the change was official. The press release went out quietly, stripped of celebration or pomp. No headlines, no LinkedIn fanfare. Daniel's interim CEO title had been revoked. The official statement said, following a thorough internal review, Carter & Comer has decided to return to its current executive structure, with Olivia Carter continuing in her leadership role, overseeing strategic operations and innovation. No mention of what happened. No mention of what almost happened. Daniel didn't come into the office that week. Neither did my father. For the first time in months, I walked into work without feeling the weight of someone else's ambition on my back. But I wasn't finished. There was still one thing left to do. A week later, I called a company-wide meeting. All hands. Everyone from interns to department heads packed into the auditorium. I stood on stage, alone, wearing the same navy suit I had worn when we secured our first international partnership. The room went silent as I stepped up to the mic. I cleared my throat, looked out at the faces I had worked beside for years, and said, I know there have been questions about changes, about leadership, about where we're going. I paused. Let the weight of the moment settle. I want to be very clear. Carter & Co. is not led by a title. It's led by the people who show up, who build, who carry it forward every single day. And I see you. I see all of you. No corporate script, no PR language, just truth. We've come too far to be distracted by ego. So from this point forward, our strategy will reflect what we've always claimed to value: results, resilience, and reality. They clapped. Slowly at first, then louder. A few people stood, not for drama, but because they knew. They had seen everything unfold, quietly, professionally, with precision. After the meeting, I went back to my office, shut the door, and sat in silence. The vengeance wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Daniel lost the title he never earned. My father lost control over a legacy he didn't fully understand. But I got something better. I got clarity, authority, freedom. They had tried to erase me. I made myself unforgettable. And I did it without screaming, without scandal, just strategy, just truth. Because in the end, revenge isn't about making someone else suffer. It's about making sure they never forget who you are. The aftermath didn't come as fire or fury. It came as silence. No one shouted. No one made a scene. No lawsuits. No press scandals. Just a quiet unraveling of what had once seemed untouchable. Daniel stepped down first. Officially, the statement said he was pursuing personal ventures and stepping away from executive duties to focus on future innovation opportunities. I didn't write it, but I approved it. I didn't need a spectacle. I just needed the chapter closed. He didn't say goodbye to me. He didn't even make eye contact during his last week at the office. He came in late, left early, and didn't show up to his own farewell drinks. I heard from someone in HR that he'd moved to Austin, that he was working on a startup with a few old friends from college. Something about sustainable tech. Something vague. I never looked it up, and I never reached out. My father stayed longer, but something in him had changed. He stopped copying me in emails. He stopped offering unsolicited advice. We crossed paths in the hallways like strangers in a city we used to know. And then, one afternoon, he appeared in my office doorway without knocking. He looked tired. Not physically, just worn. I never meant to shut you out, he said. I didn't respond. I thought I was protecting what I built, he continued. But I see now, you're the one who built it, or rebuilt it, or kept it alive anyway. Still, I said nothing. There wasn't anything left to explain. He wasn't there for forgiveness. He was there for acknowledgement. From me, but I didn't owe him that. He left the company quietly 3 months later, announcing his retirement in an internal email sent on a Sunday evening. There was no party, no public statement, just a line near the end that read, I leave the company in capable hands. That was it. Capable hands. It was the closest thing to an apology I would ever get from him, and that was fine, because by then, I didn't need it. Once they were both gone, I made changes. Real ones. I revised the leadership structure, not just to protect myself, but to protect others who might one day stand where I stood. I created a clear succession protocol, based on merit and measurable performance. I launched a mentorship initiative for young women across departments. I built a program to promote internally from underrepresented groups. I didn't just want to lead. I wanted to leave the door open behind me. Carter & Co. grew, and not just in revenue. Though yes, we hit $85 million the following year. But more importantly, the culture shifted. People spoke up more. Decisions became collaborative again. The tension that had ruled the hallways started to fade. And me? I learned to breathe again, to delegate, to take weekends off, to say no without guilt, to remember that power wasn't about proximity to titles. It was about control over my own story. People often asked me why I didn't leave. Why I didn't start my own company or take my skills somewhere new, somewhere clean. And the answer was simple. Because I didn't want to run. Leaving would have been easy, but staying meant they had to watch me take back everything they thought I didn't deserve. It meant I made them watch me succeed on my own terms, without them. One afternoon, I stayed late at the office, alone. I walked past the executive wing and into the now empty office that had once belonged to my father. It was strange seeing it like that. Clean, cleared out. I opened the bottom drawer of the old desk, not expecting to find anything, but there it was. A small framed photo, dusty and buried under a folder. It was me and Daniel. We couldn't have been older than 10. Both of us wearing plastic hard hats, standing in front of the first Carter & Kerber warehouse, holding popsicles in one hand and blueprint sketches in the other. I stared at it for a long time. And for the first time in a while, I didn't feel anger or sadness, just distance. We had once dreamed the same dream, in different ways, but only one of us fought for it. Only one of us stayed when it got hard. Only one of us earned it. I put the photo back in the drawer, gently, and closed it. That part of the story was over, and I was still here, still building, still becoming. The office was nearly silent when I arrived. Just the soft hum of the HVAC system and the low creak of the elevator doors closing behind me. The sun was still climbing over the skyline, casting a golden hue on the windows and the polished floors. I walked slowly, taking it in. Every step echoed with purpose. It had been exactly 1 year since they tried to erase me, since they scheduled a press release without telling me, since they called my years of sacrifice a strategic repositioning, since they handed my company, my work, my legacy, over to someone who didn't even understand it. But I stayed. I didn't scream. I didn't walk out. I didn't burn bridges. I played the long game, and I won. Now, everything around me carried the weight of that choice. The way people looked at me, the way they spoke to me, not with doubt, not with dismissal, with respect. I stepped into my office, the same corner room I once thought I'd lose, and closed the door behind me. The silence inside was comforting, not lonely. The books on the shelves, the photos on the side table, the whiteboard still scribbled with strategy notes and ideas. I went straight to the drawer I hadn't opened in months, the bottom one, and pulled out the envelope I kept there. It was heavier than I remembered, my name handwritten on the front. Inside, my resignation letter, the one I wrote the night everything fell apart. The letter I typed with tears in my eyes, thinking I was walking away to preserve what little dignity they had left me. But I never turned it in. I thought I kept it as a reminder of how close I came to giving up. But now I understood. I kept it as proof of who I became because I didn't. I opened it. The paper was creased and slightly yellowed around the edges. I read the first paragraph again. I remembered every keystroke, every sentence written like a final breath. It didn't sound like me anymore. It sounded like a ghost, a version of myself I no longer needed to carry. I walked over to the small side table by the window, pulled out the old ceramic bowl I sometimes used to light candles when I worked late nights. I placed the letter inside, reached into the drawer for a matchbook, lit it, and watched it burn. The fire was soft at first, curling the paper inward. The words disappeared line by line. The signature vanished. The flames danced for a few moments, then settled into quiet embers. I opened the window just a crack and let the smoke drift out into the cool morning air. It didn't smell like loss. It smelled like peace. I stood there, breathing it in, not thinking, not planning, just being, because I had nothing to prove anymore. I didn't stay to get revenge. I stayed to reclaim what was mine, and I had done that. Behind me, my phone buzzed once, then again, calendar notifications, emails, morning meetings waiting for me. I didn't rush. When I finally turned around, I moved with calm, certain ease. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black, the way I've always liked it. I adjusted the collar of my blazer, smoothed the crease of my trousers. No armor, no performance, just me. Lauren appeared at the door a few minutes later. "They're ready for you in the conference room," she said. "All of them are already there." I nodded, grabbed my notes, not because I needed them, but because I liked to be prepared. Old habit. As I walked down the hall, I passed the old executive wing, the one where my father's office used to be. It had been renovated months ago. New walls, new desks. Nothing of him remained there now. Nothing of Daniel either. I stepped into the conference room. The voices quieted when I entered. Everyone turned to look, not with surprise or judgment, but with recognition. I took my seat at the head of the table, the one they once tried to take from me, the one I never let go of. I looked at the faces in front of me. Strong, capable, loyal, people who believed in the work, who believed in me. And without hesitation, I said, "Let's begin." People often ask me if I regret staying, if it was worth the silence, the waiting, the nights I went home wondering if I should have just walked away and built something new, somewhere else, with a fresh name and no scars. And honestly, there were moments when I didn't know the answer. There were nights when the silence felt like suffocation, days when I doubted everything, my voice, my value, my fight. I wondered if all I was doing was holding on to something that never really wanted me in the first place. But now I look around at everything I've built, the people I've led, the company I've reshaped not just in my image, but in the image of those who were never given a fair shot before. I look at the respect I command, not because of my last name or my title or who my father is, but because I stayed, because I showed them who I really was, without ever raising my voice. And I don't regret a single moment, because staying wasn't weakness. It wasn't stubbornness. It was strength, real strength, the kind that doesn't demand attention, the kind that doesn't burn bridges, but rebuilds them, stronger, smarter, and this time with my name etched into the foundation. So no, I don't regret it, because I didn't just survive what they did to me. I turned it into something they could never take back. I took my story and made it mine again. And if you've ever been in that place, overlooked, underestimated, pushed aside, I want you to hear this. You are not crazy for wanting more. You are not too much for standing your ground. You are not wrong for staying. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not leave. It's to stay and make them watch you rise. Have you ever had to fight for your place, quietly, smartly, and without letting them see you break? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear it. And if this story moved you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel, because there are still so many stories left to tell.